A retired Navy SEAL thought he was buying silence when he moved into a forgotten stone estate deep in the hills of West Virginia. He didn't know the house was still breathing. He didn't know it was hiding a living operation beneath its foundation. And he didn't know his dog would be the first to understand that the danger hadn't left. It had only learned how to stay quiet. Raven Hill rose out of the fog like a place the world had decided to forget. The road curled through wet pine and broken stone, narrow enough to feel intentional, as if it didn't want visitors to find their way back. Jack Monroe kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, ignoring the tightening in his chest that always came before memories he couldn't shut down. Beside him, Atlas, his Belgian Malinois, scarred, disciplined, and painfully alert, sat rigid in the passenger seat. His ears were locked forward, his breathing shallow. This was the posture Atlas only took when something was wrong, long before it could be seen. The estate appeared suddenly through the trees, dark and oversized, its windows blind and unwelcoming. Jack told himself it was just an old house, just stone and wood and neglect. But Atlas didn't bark. He didn't whine. He growled, low and deliberate, at the unseen space beneath the floor. And in that moment, Jack understood the truth that would change everything. This house wasn't abandoned. It was active. And whatever it was hiding had been waiting. The rain over Raven Hill, West Virginia, fell in a thin, persistent curtain, soft enough to feel harmless, heavy enough to soak everything it touched. Low clouds dragged themselves across the ridgelines like tired ghosts, swallowing the tops of the pines and pressing the valley into a dim, colorless hush. It was late afternoon, but the light looked older than the day, dulled by mist and memory. Raven Hill had always been a town that faded quietly into the hills, a place people passed through without noticing, unless they were trying to disappear. Jack Monroe arrived just before dusk. He drove an aging dark green pickup, its paint scarred by gravel roads and years of neglect, its engine humming with the uneven rhythm of something that had survived more than it should have. Jack himself was 41, tall and broad-shouldered, with the compact strength of a man who had learned to live inside his body rather than decorate it. His hair, once dark, had begun to thin and gray at the temples. A faded scar cut through his right eyebrow, giving his otherwise calm face a permanent edge of severity. His eyes, steel blue and constantly alert, carried the look common to men who never fully left places where hesitation meant death. He had been a Navy SEAL for nearly 15 years. He had been retired for 3. And he had not slept through a full night since. In the passenger seat sat Atlas, a 6-year-old Belgian Malinois, lean, muscular, and coiled with restrained energy. Atlas's coat was a sharp blend of fawn and black, short and tight against a frame built for speed and endurance. His ears stood erect, never still, and his amber eyes missed nothing. There were faint scars along his muzzle, and one on his left flank. Souvenirs from deployments Jack preferred not to remember in detail. Atlas had been trained for narcotics detection and tactical operations overseas. But more than that, he had been trained to read Jack. As the truck slowed on the narrow gravel road leading uphill, Atlas lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring. Jack noticed. "Easy," Jack murmured, his voice low and controlled, the same tone he used when his pulse began to tighten. "Just a house." The Calder estate emerged from the fog like a thing surfacing from water. It was larger than Jack had expected, an old stone mansion perched on the slope of Raven Hill, its structure angular and severe, built decades earlier when money had been loud and permanence had seemed guaranteed. Ivy clung to its walls in dead, tangled ropes. Several windows were boarded, others cracked but intact. The roof sagged slightly on one side, though not enough to explain the price. $40,000, cash, no inspection required. Jack had learned long ago that when something was too cheap, it was because no one else wanted to ask why. He cut the engine. The sudden silence pressed in around them. Atlas did not move. His body stiffened, muscles drawing tight beneath his skin, head angled toward the house, his tail lowered, not in fear, but in focus. Jack stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against wet gravel. The air smelled of rain, pine, and something else. He paused. There it was. Faint, chemical, sharp in the back of the throat. Not mold, not rot. Jack swallowed. I smell it too, he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. The front door opened with a dull groan, the sound of old wood protesting movement it hadn't felt in years. Inside, the house was colder than the outside air. The foyer stretched upward, narrow and tall, with a staircase curling along the far wall. Dust coated every surface, yet the floor near the entry showed subtle disturbances. Smudges where dirt had been pushed aside rather than settled. Jack noticed. He always noticed. Atlas stepped inside and immediately lowered his head, sniffing the air in short, sharp pulls. A low growl rolled from his chest. Not loud, not aggressive, but deliberate. Jack followed the sound. The basement door stood half hidden behind a heavy wooden panel, cleverly blended into the wall. Too clever. He opened it. The smell intensified. It hit him like a memory he hadn't invited. Heat, solvent, metal. His vision flickered, not dark, just distant. For a split second, he wasn't in Raven Hill anymore. He was back in a jungle corridor, sweat pouring down his spine as barrels of chemicals burned nearby. He tasted copper, heard shouting in Spanish, felt the pressure in his chest that always came before the blast. Jack clenched his jaw. Not now, he whispered. Atlas barked once, sharp, warning. The basement itself looked unfinished but intentional. Stone walls, a concrete floor, old wine racks along one side. But Jack's eyes went immediately to the ceiling. There, thin metal ventilation pipes, newly installed, threaded between old beams and painted to match the aged wood. Someone had gone to great lengths to make them invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Jack did. He stepped closer, running his fingers along one pipe. The metal was cool, but not cold, recently used. Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. This place wasn't abandoned, he said. Atlas's growl deepened. A voice cut through the quiet behind him. You figured that out quick. Jack turned. Standing just inside the open doorway was a woman in her late 60s, perhaps early 70s. Evelyn Brooks was short and slender, her posture slightly stooped but still dignified. She wore a faded raincoat over a thick wool sweater, her gray hair pulled back into a loose bun. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp, watchful in a way that came from years of observing rather than intervening. She held herself like someone who had once spent her life caring for others and learned, too late, that care came with a cost. I'm Evelyn, she said calmly. I live down the hill, closest thing you've got to a neighbor. Jack straightened slightly, not relaxed, but respectful. Jack Monroe. Her gaze drifted briefly to Atlas. That dog of yours, she said. He's military. Jack didn't correct her. Evelyn glanced past him into the house, then back at his face. You should know, she said quietly, that this house has never really been empty. Jack studied her expression. No hysteria, no exaggeration, just certainty. People used to say the Calders left, she continued, but trucks still came at night, lights in the windows, smells that didn't belong in a place like this. She hesitated. My husband was a deputy, she added. He asked questions. Jack already knew how that story ended. Atlas shifted closer to Jack's leg. Evelyn met Jack's eyes. Be careful, she said. Some houses don't want to be left alone, and some people don't want them noticed. She turned and left without waiting for a response. That night, the storm worsened. Rain hammered the roof in uneven bursts. Wind forced its way through cracked window seals, making the walls sigh and groan. Jack lay on the bare mattress he'd brought upstairs, Atlas curled beside him, but sleep never came cleanly. When it did come, it dragged him under. Explosions, chemical fires, the same smell. Jack woke gasping, hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Atlas was already awake, pressed against his side, eyes fixed on the door. The house was silent, but it was not empty. Morning came to Raven Hill without warmth. The storm had moved on, but it left the sky washed pale and the ground slick with mud and fallen needles. Low fog clung to the trees, turning the forest into a corridor of shadows and half-shapes. Inside the Calder estate, Jack Monroe stood in the basement doorway, coffee untouched in his hand, listening to the house settle. It creaked the way old structures did, but now he knew better than to dismiss any sound as harmless. Atlas stood one step ahead of him, body angled toward the back wall, ears rigid, nose working the air. The dog had not relaxed once since the night before. Show me, Jack said quietly. Atlas moved. He crossed the basement floor with deliberate precision, stopping at the old wine racks lining the far side. The wooden lattice was dusty, bottles long gone, but Atlas pushed his nose between the slats and inhaled sharply. His tail stiffened. He pawed once at the floor, then looked back at Jack. Jack crouched, running his hand along the stone behind the racks. His fingers brushed a hairline seam, too straight, too clean to be natural. He pressed harder. The stone shifted slightly. A hidden latch. Jack exhaled through his teeth. Yeah, I see it. He braced his shoulder and pushed. The wine rack swung outward with a muted scrape, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was warmer than the basement and carried the unmistakable bite of solvents and synthetic compounds. Atlas growled low. The stairs led into a room that should not have existed beneath a house built nearly 80 years earlier. The space was carved deeper into the hill, reinforced with poured concrete and steel beams. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, some still warm to the touch. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, cluttered with glassware, burners, digital scales, and chemical containers marked only with coded symbols. Jack froze. This wasn't improvised. This wasn't abandoned. This was a functioning synthetic drug lab. His jaw tightened as he stepped inside, eyes cataloging everything automatically. The layout, the exits, the choke points. Years of training snapped back into place without effort, like a language he never forgot. He moved to one of the tables and touched a metal surface. It was clean, recently wiped. Atlas sniffed along the floor, following a trail Jack couldn't see. He stopped near a stack of heavy plastic drums sealed with red tape and let out a sharp huff. Fresh, Jack murmured. He knelt beside a crate pushed against the wall and flipped the lid open. Inside were sealed packs of precursor chemicals, labels in foreign languages, and a shipping manifest dated less than a week earlier. Nearby, a pair of rubber gloves lay discarded, still slightly damp. Jack stood slowly. "They're cooking here," he said to no one. And they didn't stop. Atlas moved to the edge of the room and barked once, short and sharp. Jack followed his gaze and saw it. Footprints in a thin layer of chemical residue near the drain. Human. Booted. Multiple sizes. Someone had been here recently, possibly last night. Jack backed out of the hidden room and carefully closed the wine rack behind him, resetting the latch until it blended seamlessly back into the wall. He stood still for a moment, listening. The house remained quiet, but now the silence felt intentional. Upstairs, he changed into darker clothes, pulled on a weathered jacket, and clipped a small flashlight to his belt. Atlas watched him closely, muscles tense. "We're not playing hero," Jack said, meeting the dog's eyes. "We observe, that's it." Atlas didn't respond, but he followed as Jack slipped out the back door and into the trees. The forest behind Calder Estate sloped downward into a maze of old logging paths and deer trails. Jack moved carefully, keeping to higher ground where the soil was less disturbed. He found the first tire tracks less than 200 yards from the house, fresh, deep, and wide enough for a medium truck. He followed them until dusk. The road they led to was barely more than a scar through the woods, but just after nightfall, headlights appeared. A truck rolled slowly along the path, engine muffled, windows blacked out, no license plates. Jack watched from the shadows as it passed, heart steady, every instinct alert. He noted the time, the direction, the weight of the vehicle by the way the suspension sagged. When it disappeared down the mountain road, he waited another full minute before moving. That was when he saw the boy. The teenager sat on a fallen log near the bend, hoodie pulled tight around his thin frame, a cheap flashlight resting in his hand. He couldn't have been more than 16. He kept glancing up the road, tense and alert, as if waiting for a signal. Atlas stiffened. Jack raised a hand, signaling the dog to stay, and stepped forward slowly, boots crunching just enough to be heard. The boy jumped to his feet, light swinging wildly. "Hey!" the kid snapped. "You're not supposed to be—" He stopped when he saw Jack's face. Up close, Luke Harris looked younger than Jack had expected. He was tall but underfed, with narrow shoulders and a face still holding traces of childhood softness. His brown hair fell into his eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he tightened his grip on the flashlight. There was defiance there, but it was thin, stretched over something like fear. "Easy," Jack said calmly. "I'm not here to hurt you." Luke's eyes flicked to Atlas, who had stepped into view, silent and imposing. The boy swallowed. "That dog," Luke said. "He's military." Jack nodded once. "You're watching the road," Luke hesitated. Then his shoulders slumped. "I just signal," he muttered. "Lights on, lights off, that's it." "Who for?" Luke didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the dirt, scuffed it with his shoe. "They pay," he said, finally. "My mom's sick. Bills don't wait." Jack studied him, noting the way his posture collapsed inward, the way his eyes avoided direct contact. Not a criminal. A kid cornered by circumstances he didn't choose. "They tell you what they're moving?" Jack asked. Luke shook his head quickly. "No, I don't want to know." That answer told Jack everything. Headlights appeared in the distance again. Another vehicle, further away this time. Luke's head snapped up. Panic flashed across his face. "You should go," he said urgently. "If they see you—" Jack raised a hand. "I won't say your name." Luke looked at him, really looked, as if weighing something heavy. Then he nodded once. "Calder Place," he whispered. "That's where it goes." Jack already knew. He stepped back into the trees, Atlas at his side, and watched Luke return to his post, small and alone against the darkness. By the time Jack reached the house again, the moon was high, casting silver light across the stone walls. Inside, he checked the basement, the wine rack, the floor around it. No new disturbances. But Atlas stopped near the chemical storage area upstairs, the smaller prep room Jack had missed earlier, and sniffed sharply. He pawed at a corner where a crate had recently been moved, revealing a clean rectangle on the dusty floor. "Deliveries are regular," Jack murmured, "and close." Atlas sat, alert, eyes fixed on the dark hallway leading deeper into the house. Jack leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing in around the edges of his focus. He thought of Luke's hunched shoulders, Evelyn's quiet warning, the lab humming beneath his feet. This wasn't a relic, it was a pipeline, and it ran straight through his house. He turned off the lights one by one and settled into a chair near the window, Atlas lying at his feet, still and watchful. Outside, the forest breathed around them, unaware or unwilling to care. Jack knew one thing with certainty now. The truth wasn't buried by time. It was buried under stone, and still very much alive. Dawn crept over Raven Hill like a reluctant witness. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the tree line, but the air remained heavy, damp, and watchful. Jack Monroe had been awake since before first light, seated at the small dining table with a battered laptop open in front of him. Atlas lay nearby, head on his paws, eyes open, tracking every sound the old house made as it cooled from the night. Jack replayed the footage again. The grainy video showed the unmarked truck rolling down the logging road, headlights dimmed, moving with the confidence of routine. Another clip followed. Chemical crates being unloaded in near darkness, figures masked, movements efficient and rehearsed. Jack paused the video and leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This wasn't a local operation. It was structured, layered, quiet. Jack had seen networks like this before. Cells that never knew more than they needed to. Routes that shifted just often enough to stay invisible. The lab beneath his house wasn't the source. It was a node, one piece of a larger machine feeding something far beyond Raven Hill. He opened a digital map and began marking locations based on what he'd observed, the truck route, the timing, the direction of travel. Everything pointed northeast, toward interstates that led to cities with demand, money, and bodies to burn through. "East Coast," Jack muttered. "They're feeding the corridor." Atlas lifted his head at the tone of Jack's voice, but remained still. Jack closed the laptop. Evidence mattered, patterns mattered, but timing mattered more, and he wasn't ready to bring the police into this, not yet. Too many operations died the moment the wrong person got tipped off. A soft knock came at the back door. Jack froze. Atlas was already on his feet, silent, tense. Jack moved to the door and opened it just enough to see Evelyn Brooks standing on the porch. She wore the same faded raincoat as before, her posture rigid despite the early hour. In her hands, she held a small tin container. "I thought you might need this," she said, holding it out. "Coffee cake. I baked too much." Jack studied her face. Her eyes were tired, but resolved. "Thank you," he said, opening the door wider. She stepped inside, her gaze drifting briefly to Atlas before returning to Jack. "He didn't relax all night," she observed. "No," Jack replied. "Neither did I." They sat at opposite ends of the table. Evelyn didn't touch the food she'd brought. "You were right," Jack said finally. The house wasn't empty. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd carried for years. "My husband thought the same." Jack waited. "Tom Brooks," she said. "County deputy, 22 years on the force." Her voice tightened just slightly. "He was stubborn, wouldn't let things go." She stared at the tabletop, eyes unfocused. He started asking questions about disappearances. Men who went into the woods and didn't come back. One of them mentioned Calder estate before he vanished. She swallowed. Tom found records that didn't add up. Deliveries, land permits, things rerouted. Jack felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. "They said it was an accident," Evelyn continued. "Truck off the road. Fire too intense for remains." She laughed once, dry and bitter. "Funny thing was, the fire started after the coroner signed the report." Silence filled the room. "They told me to stop asking questions," she said softly. "I didn't." Jack met her gaze. "And now?" "And now I bake too much and watch my neighbors disappear into themselves," she replied. "But when you moved in, I knew the house had chosen someone who wouldn't look away." Jack didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to. Evelyn stood, smoothing her coat. "Be careful, Jack. Whatever this is, it's been protected for a long time." After she left, Jack locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Atlas let out a low sound, not a growl, but a whine. Jack turned. "What is it, boy?" Atlas staggered. It was subtle at first, a hesitation in his step, a slight sway. Then his legs buckled, and he dropped to his side, breathing shallow but fast. Jack was on him instantly. "Atlas!" His voice stayed calm, controlled. "Stay with me." He checked the dog's gums, pale, pupils dilated. Jack's mind raced through possibilities. Injury? No. Heat? No. Poison. Jack scanned the room, then the floor near the back door. A small smear near the baseboard caught his eye, oily, almost invisible. He grabbed a cloth, dabbed it, sniffed. Sweet. Artificial. Jack cursed under his breath. Someone had been close enough to lace bait, close enough to watch. He administered water slowly, using a syringe from his medical kit, monitoring Atlas's breathing. Minutes stretched. Atlas shuddered once, then again, and finally his breathing steadied. He wasn't unconscious, but he was weak. Jack sat back on his heels, fury coiling tight in his gut. They knew about the dog. They knew about him. That afternoon, Jack reviewed his perimeter. He found a footprint near the tree line that hadn't been there before. Carefully placed, half erased. Professional. He followed it just long enough to confirm it led away from the house, not toward it. A message. As night fell, Jack set up additional cameras, hiding them where only someone with his background would think to look. He tested angles, blind spots, redundancy. Atlas watched from the doorway, resting but alert, eyes tracking Jack's movement. "You're not done yet," Jack told him quietly. "Neither am I." He sat back down at the table and reviewed his evidence again. Video, timestamps, chemical manifests. The pattern was undeniable now. The Calder estate wasn't just producing drugs, it was stabilizing them, refining batches before shipment north. A quality control point. Someone had invested heavily in this place. Jack shut the laptop and looked around the room. The house creaked softly, as if shifting under a burden it had carried too long. "They think they can scare us off," he said aloud. Atlas lifted his head slightly, tail thumping once against the floor. Jack allowed himself a thin smile. "They forgot something," he murmured. "I don't leave when I'm warned." Outside, The forest pressed close, dark and patient. Somewhere beyond the trees, trucks moved, phones rang, orders were given. The network in the shadows kept working. But now it had been seen. Night fell hard over Raven Hill, not with drama, but with intent. The forest absorbed the last light quickly, branches knitting shadows together until the logging roads vanished into black corridors. Jack Monroe moved through the trees with Atlas at his side, keeping distance from the house for the first time since the poisoning. He knew the pattern had shifted. Whoever ran the operation beneath Calder Estate had realized they were no longer alone, and networks didn't tolerate unknown variables. Atlas was still recovering, his movements precise but slower than usual. The Belgian Malinois stayed close to Jack's left knee, head low, ears scanning. The dog's coat caught faint moonlight in broken flashes, revealing the tension coiled beneath his skin. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. Jack felt it too. He had chosen the forest path deliberately, following the same trail Luke Harris used when signaling trucks. If the network was watching, they'd expect him to hide. Jack had learned long ago that survival often meant moving directly through danger instead of around it. The ambush came without sound. A branch snapped behind him, not careless, but timed. Jack dropped instantly, rolling downhill as a suppressed shot cracked the space where his head had been. Dirt exploded against his shoulder. Atlas lunged, barking once, sharp and furious, before Jack snapped his fingers in a tight signal. Stay! The second shot came from the right. Jack crawled, then surged forward into cover, breath steady, mind empty of everything except angles and distance. He saw them then, two figures moving through the trees, faces hidden, steps confident. Not local muscle. Professionals. Jack waited until the third man revealed himself, then moved. He struck from behind, wrapping an arm around the shooter's neck, twisting until the man dropped unconscious without a sound. Jack rolled the body aside, stripped the weapon, and vanished again before the others could triangulate his position. Atlas rejoined him silently, teeth bared, eyes blazing. They disengaged downhill, not toward the house, but toward the old quarry path Luke had once mentioned in passing. Jack knew that if they were hunting him, Luke was already in danger. He found the boy near the clearing, just before dawn. Luke Harris was tied to the front seat of an idling truck, hands bound, face bruised. He looked smaller than before, shoulders hunched inward, hoodie torn. A man stood beside the open door, shouting into a phone, frustration sharp in his posture. The man was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, wearing a clean jacket that didn't belong in the woods. His hair was neatly cut, his movements precise. This was not a thug. This was logistics. Jack didn't hesitate. Atlas launched first, slamming into the man's legs with controlled force, knocking him to the ground. Jack followed, wrenching the phone away and delivering a single, brutal strike that ended the conversation permanently. Chengti stared, eyes wide, breath hitching. "You okay?" Jack asked, already cutting the restraints. Luke nodded rapidly. "They said I was late, said I had to ride along this time." Jack clenched his jaw. "You didn't." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, not close enough to matter yet. They moved fast, Jack guiding Luke through the trees, Atlas watching their rear. When they reached a safe distance, Jack stopped and crouched in front of the boy. "Listen carefully," Jack said, voice low, but steady. "This doesn't end with you watching roads. They were going to make you disappear once you were inconvenient." Luke swallowed hard, tears streaking dirt down his face. "I didn't have a choice." You do now. Jack pulled out his phone and stepped aside, dialing a number he hadn't used in over 2 years. The call connected on the second ring. "Megan Cole," a woman's voice answered, sharp and controlled. Jack exhaled. "It's Jack." There was a pause, then a breath. "You're alive," she said. Megan Cole had been Jack's teammate for 6 deployments. Tall, athletic, with close-cropped dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd left the teams after an IED took half her squad and joined the DEA, trading combat boots for federal credentials. Megan had always believed in systems, even after those systems failed her. "Barely," Jack replied. "I need you to listen. No reports yet. No locals." Her tone shifted instantly. "What did you find?" "A synthetic lab under my house. Active, feeding Northeast distribution. They poisoned my dog." Silence. Then, "Send me what you have." Jack glanced at Luke, who sat on a fallen log, shaking but upright. "I've got more," Jack said. "A witness, a route map, and a shipment window." "I'm already listening," Megan replied. Jack hung up and returned to Luke. "You remember the schedules?" Jack asked. Luke nodded quickly. "There's a big one coming. 2 trucks. Tomorrow night. They leave before midnight, split at the county line." Jack handed him water. "You just saved more lives than you know." As the sun rose over Raven Hill, Jack led Luke back toward the edge of town, dropping him near Evelyn Brooks' place, where lights were already on. "You stay here," Jack said. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." Luke hesitated, then looked at Atlas. "He's okay?" Jack glanced at his dog. "He will be." Luke nodded and disappeared inside. Jack stood alone on the road for a moment. Atlas pressed against his leg. The forest quiet again, but changed. They weren't being hunted anymore. They were in the fight. The night arrived without stars. Low clouds smothered Raven Hill, turning the forest into a sealed room where sound traveled strangely and light died early. Jack Monroe stood at the edge of the Calder estate's tree line, breath slow, pulse measured, the weight of old instincts settling into place with unwelcome familiarity. Beside him, Atlas shifted, favoring his left shoulder, but alert, every line of his body taut. The faint bandage beneath the dog's short coat was already damp from the mist. He ignored it. 100 yards downslope, unmarked vehicles idled with engines cut. The DEA team moved quietly among them, dark silhouettes, disciplined, careful. At their center was Megan Cole, taller than most of her agents, shoulders squared beneath a tactical jacket. Her hair was pulled tight at the nape, practical and severe. Megan's face carried the calm of someone who trusted preparation more than luck. The years since the teams had carved sharp lines at the corners of her eyes, but they'd also given her a steadiness Jack recognized immediately. "Windows tight," Megan said, voice low through the comms. "They're finishing a batch tonight. If we wait, it moves." Jack nodded once. "They'll try to burn the lab if they sense us." "That's why we go now," she replied. "Your call puts us inside before they finish." Jack glanced toward the house, stone walls dark, windows blind. Somewhere beneath it, burners hummed. Somewhere nearby, men watched roads and counted minutes. He felt the old pressure in his chest, the one that came when choices narrowed and consequences sharpened. "Let's break it," he said. They split cleanly. Megan led 2 agents around the east approach, cutting power at the pole the team had identified earlier. Another pair circled wide to the rear, blocking the logging path. Jack and Atlas moved straight in, slipping through the side door Jack had kept unsecured on purpose. The lock gave with a soft click, and the house swallowed them. Inside, The Calder estate breathed like a living thing, air moving through hidden ducts, a distant vibration underfoot. The lights flickered once, then died. Somewhere below, a generator kicked, the hum rising in pitch. Jack took the stairs 2 at a time. Atlas stayed tight, shoulder brushing Jack's knee. At the basement level, the smell hit hard, sharp, chemical, almost sweet. Voices echoed from the hidden room, hurried now, edges fraying. "DEA!" Megan's voice rang out, amplified and clear. "On the ground!" gunfire answered. The first shots cracked against stone, sparks spitting where rounds kissed the walls. Jack flattened against the stairwell, returned fire in short, controlled bursts. Atlas surged past him, a streak of muscle and intent, driving straight into the chaos. The dog hit a shooter mid-step, knocking him sideways into a table that clattered and collapsed. Jack moved, clearing corners, forcing space. A man bolted from the lab doorway, weapon raised. Atlas intercepted, jaws locking onto the forearm as the man screamed and went down. Another figure appeared behind him, taller, slower, eyes calculating. He didn't raise a gun, he smiled. "Jack Monroe," the man said calmly. "You always were predictable." He stepped into the emergency lights, revealing a face older than the photographs Jack had seen, but unmistakable. Henry Calder, thinner now, hair silvered, posture relaxed with the confidence of someone used to owning rooms. He wore a tailored jacket that didn't belong underground and moved with the easy authority of a man who never expected to be challenged. "You're dead," Jack said flatly. Calder shrugged. "Names die. Infrastructure doesn't." He gestured, and somewhere deeper in the lab, a timer began to chirp, high, insistent. Jack's eyes flicked toward the sound, calculating distances. "Burn protocol," Calder said. "You win the room. I keep the network." Megan's team pushed in from the east, weapons up, driving remaining shooters back. Glass shattered. A burner tipped, blue flame licking across spilled solvent. The timer chirped faster. Atlas broke from the downed man and leapt toward Jack just as a shot rang out from the shadows. The round caught Atlas high in the shoulder. The dog yelped once, sharp, wounded, and crashed into Jack, taking him off balance. Jack rolled with the impact, heart slamming, hands already on Atlas, dragging him behind cover. "No," Jack breathed, fingers slick with blood. "Stay with me." Atlas trembled, but didn't release the low, furious growl vibrating in his chest. He was still in the fight. "Jack!" Megan shouted. "We've got fire spreading!" Jack looked up. Calder was gone. The timer hit 0. Jack hauled Atlas up and moved. They cleared the hidden room as flames raced along the floor, fed by chemicals that should never have been mixed. Megan's agent smashed suppression canisters into place, foam choking the fire while another agent triggered the emergency deluge. Water slammed down, steam billowing, alarms screaming. Above them, the house groaned. Outside, Evelyn Brooks moved with purpose. She had gathered the children from the nearest houses earlier. Quiet knocks, urgent whispers, shepherding small hands into cars without explanations that would only slow them down. Her posture was rigid but resolute, the calm of a woman who had learned to act when others froze. She drove them down the hill toward the school gym, headlights cutting through fog, ignoring the distant thumps that rolled from the estate like thunder. Back inside, Jack pressed a bandage into Atlas's wound, hands steady despite the tremor crawling up his arms. The dog licked his wrist, eyes bright with pain and loyalty. "You did good," Jack said hoarsely. "You hear me? Good." Megan knelt beside them. "EMS is staged. We've got the lab contained, products compromised. Jack nodded, breath coming hard. The old fear pressed in, the memory of rooms that burned, of nights that never ended. He forced it back, anchored himself to the weight of Atlas against his leg, to the sound of agents moving with purpose, to the knowledge that this time the fight had a reason that wasn't orders. They carried Atlas up the stairs as the last flames died, foam and water turning the basement into a chemical grave. Outside, rain began again, washing smoke into the trees. Sirens approached, controlled now, coordinated. Jack stood in the doorway and looked back once more. The Calder estate shuddered, then settled, as if exhaling. Somewhere beyond the trees, Henry Calder disappeared into the dark, a name shed, a network wounded, but not yet finished. Jack didn't chase, not tonight. Morning broke gently, as if the mountains themselves had decided to be kind. Pale sunlight slid over Raven Hill, thinning the fog and warming the wet leaves until they released the clean scent of pine and earth. From the crest of the hill, the Calder estate no longer looked like a fortress crouched in shadow. It looked tired, spent, and finally quiet. Jack Monroe stood at the edge of the gravel drive, hands in his jacket pockets, watching federal vehicles roll away one by one. The operation had stretched through the night, meticulous and relentless. By dawn, it was finished. The network was gone. Down the slope, Henry Calder was escorted toward a black SUV, wrists cuffed behind him. Without the tailored jacket and rehearsed calm, he appeared smaller, older, his shoulders slightly hunched beneath a thin raincoat. His silver hair was uncombed, his eyes ringed with sleepless red. When he looked back at the house, there was no rage in his expression, only resignation. Men like Calder never mourned places. They mourned leverage. The evidence had spoken for itself. Ledgers pulled from off-site storage, encrypted drives recovered from a false wall, shipping records matched to routes Jack had mapped by hand. Megan Cole's team had moved fast and clean, following threads Jack had tugged loose. By sunrise, arrests rippled outward like a controlled burn. Distribution hubs, financiers, shell companies folding in on themselves. Megan stood near the steps, issuing final instructions, her posture composed but lighter than Jack had ever seen it. She caught his eye and nodded once. It was the kind of acknowledgement forged in shared risk rather than ceremony. "They're done," she said when she reached him. "All of it." Jack released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You got him." "We got the whole spine," Megan replied. Calder talked when he realized how complete the case was. He always needed an audience. She glanced toward the house. "You did the hard part." Jack shook his head slightly. "We all did." A low huff sounded at his side. Atlas stood there, a wide bandage wrapping his shoulder, fur shaved around the wound. He was thinner than before, movement still careful, but his eyes were clear and bright. The Belgian Malinois leaned into Jack's leg, steady and warm, tail giving a slow, content sweep against the damp grass. Jack crouched and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. "You're still here," he murmured. "That's what matters." Atlas licked his chin, as if in agreement. Later that morning, the Calder estate was formally sealed. Notices were posted. The property was seized under federal forfeiture statutes, its future no longer dictated by secrecy or profit. Jack watched agents catalog rooms that had once hidden harm, now exposed to light and accountability. Across town, Luke Harris stepped onto a yellow school bus for the first time in weeks. His hoodie had been replaced by a Clean jacket, his posture straighter, eyes still wary, but no longer hunted. His name would never appear in reports. His involvement had been scrubbed clean and sealed away. The guidance counselor walked him to his seat with a reassuring hand on his shoulder, speaking softly about missed assignments and fresh starts. Luke glanced out the window as the bus pulled away and saw Raven Hill receding behind the trees. For the first time since he'd been pulled into the shadows, he allowed himself to believe the road ahead belonged to him again. At the edge of town, Evelyn Brooks stood with a small group of neighbors outside the community center, watching children file back inside after a long night spent away from home. Evelyn's hair had come loose from its bun, strands silvering her face, but her eyes were calm. She had moved through the crisis with quiet authority, driven not by fear, but by memory, by a husband who had asked the wrong questions and paid the price. When Jack approached, she smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "They are safe," she said. "All of them," Jack nodded. "Thank you." She waved it away. It was time someone finished what Tom started. Her gaze shifted to Atlas, softening. "You did good, both of you." The days that followed felt unreal in their steadiness. Repairs began almost immediately. Broken doors replaced, burned stone scrubbed clean. The hidden lab beneath the house was dismantled, piece by piece, its equipment cataloged and destroyed. What remained was a structure with strong bones and a complicated past. No longer a threat, but not yet a promise. The decision came quietly. Jack signed the final paperwork with a steady hand. The Calder estate would be repurposed, not sold. With federal backing and community support, it would become a rehabilitation and recovery center, a place for veterans carrying invisible wounds, and for young people clawing their way back from addiction. Not a monument, a tool. Megan stood beside him as he signed, reading over the documents. "You sure?" she asked. "You could walk away clean." Jack looked through the window at Atlas lying in the sun, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm. "I've been walking away a long time," he said. "I'm done with that." Atlas recovered quickly. Stitches came out. Strength returned. He resumed his patrols of the grounds, slower now, deliberate, greeting workers with polite suspicion before settling into watchful calm. The staff joked that he was the real security system. Weeks passed. Raven Hill adjusted. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of hammers and laughter, by the rhythm of people reclaiming a place once defined by fear. One morning, just before dawn, Jack climbed the path to the top of Raven Hill. Atlas followed, moving easily now, bandage gone, coat glossy in the low light. They reached the overlook as the first line of sun broke across the horizon, turning the valley gold. Jack stood still, hands resting loosely at his sides. For the first time in years, his chest didn't feel tight. The memories were still there, always would be, but they no longer ruled him. Atlas sat beside him, shoulder pressed against Jack's leg. Below them, the Calder estate caught the light, windows bright, doors open. A house that had once produced harm now stood ready to stop it. Jack closed his eyes briefly and let the morning settle into him. "This is home," he said softly. Atlas answered with a quiet, satisfied breath. And the hill, at last, was silent in the way silence was meant to be. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple and deeply human. Evil does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it hides in quiet places, behind closed doors, beneath familiar ground. In our daily lives, we often believe that avoiding trouble is the same as staying safe. But this story reminds us that true peace is not found by running away. It is found when someone chooses to stand still, look honestly at what is wrong, and protect others even when it costs something. Jack did not set out to be a hero. He only wanted silence. But when darkness crossed his path, he chose responsibility over comfort, courage over escape. And because of that choice, a place of harm became a place of healing. That is something any of us can do in our own way. We may not face danger like Jack did, but we all encounter moments where we must decide whether to look away or to do what is right. Atlas reminds us of loyalty. He did not ask why. He stayed. He protected. He trusted. In our own lives, being faithful to what is good, even when we are tired or wounded, can change everything. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that light still matters. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from, or what part of this story stayed with you the most. If you believe that courage and compassion can still overcome darkness, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories like this. May God bless you and protect you. May He give you strength when the road feels heavy, and peace when the noise of the world grows loud. If you believe in hope, healing, and second chances, write Amen in the comments. Thank you for being here.